Hey everybody, Sean Albertson here. I'm so happy to have you join us for this great panel. I'm here with some experts in the field of CX, consultants, practitioners, and the like. And we're going to talk a little bit about the current state of customer experience, knowing that we're kind of in transition and there's a little bit of opportunity for us to kind of figure things out and understand this landscape as it's changing, in the midst of data and AI and all of this new technology that's coming to us. Great opportunity to, again, learn from these experts, and I'm so happy they joined us today as well. So we're going to kick this off by quick introductions. Mark, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing, and maybe just a brief. What do you think? Your gut reaction of what's the current state of CX?
Thanks, Sean. Good to connect with you guys here, and thanks for letting me join. I'm Mark Mandel. I've been a lifelong, or at least a career-long, vendor side guy in the world of CX. Sometimes on the platform side, sometimes on the services side, from which I retired back in the springtime of 2024, and decided I was going to go out and start my own venture called Wow Moments, where I'm now selectively engaged with a handful of clients on the client side and a handful on the vendor side to sort out CX problems and help them kind of get better relationships with their customers for the long term. It's been an interesting transition, but certainly a rewarding one. When I look at the industry that we're all in, it is changing. And I think the changes, the way I like to summarize them, up until now, we could get away with activities as a marker of success. Now it's outcomes. If we're not getting very financially monetizable outcomes from the work we're doing, nobody's interested in it anymore. And the reality is that's the only way to get us funded, that's the only way to retain our work, and that's the only way to grow our contribution. I think if it's not about outcomes, it's not going to work any longer. So we need to be very hyper focused on what impact are we making and how do we explain it in terms of money. That's my assessment right now.
Well, thanks for that, Mark. Continuing on, Matt, you're right next to him in my Brady Bunch view, so why don't you jump in?
Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Matt Eagle. I am the founder of Journey Spark Consulting, and I recently hung a shingle and launched my own firm. I spent many years as a partner at Booz & Company and PwC, where I focused on the intersection of experience and culture. When I think about where we are right now with the experience space, I think we're at an inflection point, which is a bit like two trends colliding that are causing a lot of change right now. One of them is a very positive trend around greater interest in experience, whether you have chief customer officers, chief experience officers, chief digital officers, chief innovation and growth officers, whatever the new C-level interest is, in addition to the interest of chief marketing officers, because the largest number of CX teams sit in the marketing organization, but it's less than 50% of them, based on the research that I've done in the past. But there's a lot of leaning in to experience, where experience is combined with other things. So there's always been centers of excellence. So whether it's a digital center of excellence, analytics, other things, experience is folded in with those other things. And that's a positive trend because those groups can have bigger impact with more executive sponsorship. But the other competing trend is a greater focus on tech enablement and AI and data. And this is a long running trend. But in the short run, we're seeing a repeat of the movie that we saw with e-commerce, which is a lot of tech and analytics teams are grabbing CX. And so there's a lot of interest in the analytical and data approach to CX, where in the short run, there's a lot of pressure of it getting sucked in to the other things and losing its focus on the broader impact from a business perspective. So we need collaboration with technology and data, but that doesn't mean you should move the cheese over to that side of the house.
Great. Well, thanks, Matt. So, Deanna, why don't you introduce yourself, share a little bit of your background as well.
Hi, I'm Deanna Nunley, and the CX transitions, I think we're continually going through transitions. I've been in the CX field for a couple of decades, primarily in a high-tech And I am recently transitioning myself, moving into more of a consulting role after a 30-year career where I focused on customer experience from multiple different perspectives, be it on the digital platform or, into human interaction. And as far as transitions go, I think I'm going to be a little bit of a traditionalist here and say that no matter the transitions that we've seen over the years, it still comes down to audience first and understanding the target audience and who you want to reach and how to reach them, which is often dependent on was mentioned already, the outcomes, but also the processes that that individual needs to go through and what their desire is. So I think it's very important in this time of all the data and the AI and the technology to not lose sight of we've got humans on the other side, and it's really about that customer and what will they buy into, so to speak, to get to those ultimate outcomes. And the technology is great up front, may not be what that customer actually wants. If I'm going to go back to that traditional view, they might want a little more interpersonal connections at certain points.
Thanks, Deanna. Yeah, we're actually going to pull on that string a little bit because there's some really good stuff going on there, and thank you for that. Susie.
Hey, Sean. Thanks so much for including me today. I'm Susie Earhart. After spending 10 years as a practitioner working with several companies, doing CX primarily in the service space, running contact centers, reorganizing processes, focusing on omni-channel delivery, I decided about 7 years ago to go into the consulting space. As a senior CX consultant, I've worked with a number of companies in pharmaceuticals, financial insurance, as well as technology, and been focusing on a broad set of customer experience disciplines. But in the past couple of years, I've realized that CX is more than just the tools that we use. I strongly agree with the comment made earlier that it's about the outcomes that CX drives, for the employees, for the customers, for the partners, for everyone. And my view of CX is that for a very long time, we've seen CX as what I call a function or a department. I'm starting to realize that CX is an ingredient. Just like safety is a way that we work, CX needs to be a way that an enterprise works. And therefore, we need to stop thinking about CX as an independent function that a team runs. And we need to equip the whole organization to be using CX tools, thinking in CX mindsets to deliver those outcomes, not just the outcomes that they had planned, but amplify the outcomes. Think about the right ingredient that makes the results even richer, even more fine, even more appealing to the organization. So that's my perspective on how CX is changing right now.
Yeah, and that's great, and we're going to talk about that too because I think there's some really good stuff there. Jason, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, my name is Jason Tenpow. Been working in the CX space for well over 20 years. From a very specific perspective, though, data. And so, it may have started with, customer feedback and then integrating behavioral data and bringing it all together to tell the complete customer journey story and to help understand how customers perceive their interactions and how they're actually interacting with brands. And one of the things that I've seen, and that's very interesting because Mark, you've mentioned it, Matthew, Deanna, I think we've all sort of mentioned it. If we're going to be measured as CXers on outcomes, right, and processes we create, we have to be able to gather the data to actually measure the performance of the things that we're doing in order to be able to advocate for more of things that are actually endearing the customer to the brand. And I think CX historically has, I would like to say, shied away from sort of getting really deep into the data, but I don't think we can ignore that for much longer because I think that's now going to be a key part of the ingredient, as Susie mentioned, for us to be able to collaborate with different groups within an organization and to be part of these very important conversations moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, I think we all talked about it in different ways, but there's balance of CX, and maybe even a certain level of balance of power of CX, not from a human perspective per se, like a departmental perspective, but more where's the focus. And I see it it's a pendulum, right? I mean, in the early days, it was very much about panels and face-to-face and interviews and conversations with clients. And then it was, surveys at mass scale and, a lot of focus there. And then, more research, approach blended that together. But then now it's swinging towards data and tech and so forth. But there's this balance of the human side, as Deanna, you said, and the technology and data side that was mentioned as well. And it's changing forever because data and technology has to be part of that. But in some ways, I want to throw this out to you that, the more data and tech we use to answer quant questions, maybe the more time we have spent, if we decide to actually go back to having conversations with customers. What do you think about that, in this transition? Where do you think the outcome's going to be as we see this pendulum swinging back and forth? So let's actually start with Deanna. I'd love to hear you first when you're really thinking about where we're going. Talk about that a little bit.
I think what stood out to me when you said conversations, my mind went right to where are those conversations happening? And I think that's going to be key because, as you said, we talked about, focus groups or customer feedback was such an emphasis for so long. We're now in a place where those conversations are happening real time everywhere. So how do you really collect that? So where do you have those intentional conversations? Where do you just hear that they're happening? Because I think human nature is still going to be that whether it's a good experience, bad experience, and oftentimes we hear more from poor experiences, the conversation goes out there. And we know there's this whole viral component. I think it's really interesting that regardless of all the data we look at, again, not get too caught up into say, oh, because everything's online and everything's, with AI and coming at individuals and working in this, cloud space, if you will, that, again, we're still human, and go capture where those conversations are happening, not lose sight of the real-time conversation, and mix that in, as you said, a blending balance of how you then intentionally go engage with that audience. So a little bit of that, informal, go find where those conversations are happening, because regardless of what the data says, there's going to be conversations out there somewhere.
Yeah, so I think we're in a bit of a barbell opportunity, like two extremes. On the one hand, we shouldn't forget that the peaks in a journey, in the customer journey, are where the emotions are strongest and where there's a meaningful and memorable experience. The mind's a memory-making machine, and that's where the peaks occur. And those are very often where there's a human being interacting with another human being. And the culture intersection here is your behaviors of your employees. Culture is all about behavior. Really shape those interactions and whether you get those emotional peaks. So a lot of opportunity with CX is actually around getting those EX, CX intersections right and getting those peaks to occur. So we don't want to automate and turn those into chatbots unless we can replicate the same emotional experience, which is really hard to do. But we'll get there. Now, the other end of the barbell, there are lots of experiences that can be automated and turned into either something with a human being ready to grab the wheel. So an example is you think about all of the social media interactions and all of the call center interactions. Those are conversations that are increasingly visible. There's a digital data signal. You can track and mine those conversations for insights. But increasingly, a lot of these interactions are now in-app or messaging. So with one hotel client, we found that there was a significant increase in messaging with the guests throughout the journey rather than the end of the journey. And the volume of messages in only 10% of the properties was already greater than the number of surveys they issued in a year, right? And it was growing exponentially. Now, those are actually an opportunity, whether it's a hotel or it's a retailer or it's a bank or healthcare, to take a number of interactions that previously were human beings and have a message sent with next best content and using AI to optimize it with continuous experimentation, where a human being has the chance to grab the wheel or intervene or get involved. But there'll be a huge volume of messages that you can actually optimize for emotional impact with an AI-driven experimentation approach. But you have to decide which of the experiences are going to be at which end of the extreme. Both of them should have data. Both of them have experience design. But one is more like an e-commerce experience and the other is like a white glove experience. And you want to get both of them right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and to continue pulling on that a little bit, you talked about the human connection and the technology connection. So, Jason, I know that you just completed, some research that still shows the call center, the phone organization is still king, currently. So, Jason, talk a little bit more about what your findings were.
Yeah, it's interesting. While organizations are in full motion trying to transition customers from interacting with the brand person to person to moving them into a digital environment, customers are saying quite plainly they still prefer person to person interaction. And so the question remains, and one of the great data points was, I think it was about 50% of customers still prefer when they have a problem, I want to pick up the phone and talk to somebody, right? And so what does that tell you about this innate need for us to interact with other individuals? And when brands start to ignore this, they risk rupturing their relationships with customers. And that is a danger. And I think with every trend, there's always a rebound. And yes, we've seen this sort of move towards digital because, let's be honest, it's cheaper, right? They've done the math. They said it's cheaper, right? Well, it's only cheaper if you're not losing your customers. If you start losing your customers, it becomes very, very expensive. Another department is getting that money, right? But the brand as a whole really suffers. And I think much of these analysis are really being done in a microcosm. They're not really looking across the entire success of an organization. And that's dangerous. And that's what the data was really telling us, is that customers, yeah, they see digital, they see that there's some opportunities to use them when they need something. But when there's a problem and it really matters, they want to speak to someone. And brands that overlook that, watch out.
Yeah, and I think to your point, when you're saying this balance, yes, automation is more beneficial to the company. I mean, let's be honest, than the customer, because the customer still wants to talk to people, but it's still a big part of what we do. So, Mark, I know you work with a lot of different technology platforms and vendors and partners. What's your take on kind of that yin and yang, that push and pull, if you will?
I'm going to come across like a little contrarian here in this conversation. I hope that's okay. We've talked earlier in this conversation about customer experience being an outcomes-driven cause at this point. We talked about it being a little bit more focused on change management than it is about other types of roles. If we can take that into account, a lot of us are looking at CX as a technology play in some capacity or another. And the reality is too many of our clients are still confusing technology, thinking it's part of the ends and not part of the means. I would never promote technology as an end. Technology is a very capable enabler as part of a means, but the reality is, I can't tell you the look on my face the first time somebody with their straight face said to me, well, we've been running our NPS program gathering survey data for the last 2 years. Why aren't things getting better? And I said, well, how are you changing things? And they said, well, what do you mean? And the point being, they thought the act of acquiring a platform and initiating a survey on itself was going to make things materially better for their customers and for them. And I make the metaphor, it's like I want to lose a few pounds, and when I don't, I blame the scale in my bathroom. Right? I mean, the reality is we're understanding what our tools are, and our tools are getting more and more capable, like what you guys are talking about frontline engagement and the potential there to deflect cost or to engage a customer differently. But the reality, guys, is the minute we put too much faith and confidence in a tech for tech's sake solution, we lose sight of the human element, and people still do want that human element, both internally and externally.
No, that's great. And yes, I do blame my scale. It's its fault.
You and me both.
So no, so going into that, so Susie, what's your take? Go a little deeper into your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so as somebody who I spent 10 years in contact centers. I built the technology around them. I supported the people who were delivering it. And I get the pain of that customer who says, I have a problem, I have a need, help me. Right. And when the chatbot asks me the same 5 questions that I've already gone through and then tells me, I'll think about connecting you to a human after you read this article. Well, no wonder I'm ballistic by the time I get to talk to a human being. Right. So, to me, one of the big changes that I think CX has to realize is that our world is moving towards a more data orientation, a higher focus on technology, AI improvements, those types of things. And we have to adapt. We have to be ready to do the analysis. We have to be ready to embrace the technology. But we also, to Mark Mandel's point, have to be ready to be challengers and say, that just because we have great technology doesn't mean we're meeting the needs of our customers. And that's to me where the richness of the contact center exists. Whether you're mining chat transcripts, whether you're talking to the employees who are on the phones, you can very quickly learn where are those moments that make or break the relationship with a customer. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in doing our post-transaction surveys that we forget that the real conversations, those moments that really matter, come out of that, what I call voice of business, or that conversation within the teams and the employees. So finding a way to aggregate that understanding of how does our data meet what we're hearing. And I want to reinforce what Jason said earlier. I'm hearing the same statistics. 40-50% of the people want to talk to a human being when they have a problem. And as a parent of 20-something-year-olds, I'm seeing them even more interested in doing that. So we have a generational shift too of humans who want to be more connected to humans. And so I think brands have to think about intentionally saying, where do I make things simple? And where do I need to intervene? And using that technology to intervene at the right time, I think that's the key to where CX can really make a difference for a brand.
I think what a common denominator across a lot of us is that we want to deliver value. We think that CX should link to outcomes, and that it's not easy to drive change in an organization where in many cases the most expedient path is the least cost path. If you think about and the technology promises short-term opportunities often that create automation and cost savings. And any path to value has to go through one of three things. It either is going to be better, faster, or cheaper. And the cheaper path is often the more expedient path. And when we're change agents within an organization to help move the organization ahead to better, faster, and cheaper, you got to put the work in to define the vision. How are you going to create value? What's the right alignment of better, faster, and cheaper? That's how your CX and brand promise come together, right? That's how your capabilities align to this. CX fits with a customer-driven approach to how you build those capabilities. And then if you want to be better, think about how are you going to measure better rather than just measure cheaper. As an example, with one retail client in consumer electronics that has a very large call center, they were looking at, how do they think about what success is in a call, and how do you drive the right behaviors and drive the right experience in those calls. Now, rather than measure call duration, right, which was actually not going to deliver better. Right? We focused on what are the things that you want the customer to feel? What are the emotions you want the customer to feel? You want them to be relaxed, supported, confident, and optimistic. And we didn't pick those randomly. We actually studied that and looked at the journey and what are the emotions occurring at the peak. And if you want them to feel relaxed, supported, confident, and optimistic in the journey, then there's certain things you're going to do in that journey. And we actually showed that if you got them to feel that way in the interaction, you had an 80% statistical fit with the business outcomes we wanted. So that's how you get change to occur, is if you link it to the outcome and you make it very practical, like to what to do. But if all we had measured was the obvious stuff, like how do we reduce the cost of the calls, then we would have had exactly the wrong business outcome.
Well, and I think in some ways what you're also describing, and kind of Susie, what you were as well, is that with this rush to tech, everybody's focused on individual technical components. And what it's actually sacrificing the experience, and it's making it work harder and slower and take longer because people have to repeat. And I think that was another finding we had in some of the research was, I don't want to repeat anything from channel to channel to channel. I want everything to be moving forward, and when it doesn't happen, I have to go back over if I have to tell an agent what I was doing online these days, I'd rather just them know, right? And I'd rather them see that within the value, because that does create it better and makes it ultimately faster and cheaper because you've shortened the timeline by not repeating steps. So it's the way tech is enabled and the way it's integrated, or not, more often than not. And that's why I say people, process, and platform, because I like to say it's about a platform. The platform means all the technology works together. If you just say technology, you could say it's just one more silo, people silo, et cetera, et cetera. So
I think one of the big transitions that the CX community has an opportunity to do is that we have traditionally measured at the end of the interaction, right? We perceive that, what's that metric of your NPS? What's your satisfaction at the end? Technology enables us today to be able to measure the operational metrics throughout that process. And by being able to stop and say, how long has been somebody sitting and waiting for a response? How difficult was it to accomplish this task? How many clicks do they do? Those kinds of things. I think as CXers, if we embrace, and I shouldn't even say CXers, as Xers, right? As Xers, if we embrace the idea of measuring the experience through all the steps of the process and not just waiting to the end, we truly create a greater impact because we can fix it as it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody want to add something to that?
The one comment I had, a bit of what Susie had said, I think even previously, was I think it comes down to making sure that we understand where there's need for choice, and that whoever's interacting has that choice of, hey, I really need that person. So I think it's not just keep it simple, but make it easy for that customer or partner to be able to guide what that next step is. But at the same time, it's setting expectations. It's not just giving those opportunities, but it's also expectation setting. And so even, we've seen studies of even when it's a very difficult situation to resolve, in setting expectations with that customer, it may not even matter the length of time, as long as they stay in the loop, they know it's being worked, and ultimately it could take a super long time to resolve, or even if it doesn't get resolved, it goes back to that feeling and that almost that care that, hey, you were listening to me, you understood what my challenge was, and you helped me, even if the end outcome wasn't my ideal state. It may keep that relationship. So I think there's a key piece of the choice as well as expectation setting along the way, along with understanding your processes and measuring along the way, because that's ultimately where you can make some of those changes. But if you don't understand those back end and internal processes, you could be missing many opportunities for those improvements.
I'm thinking a lot about measurement relative to expectations, because I look at we all talk about things like customer effort. And is it easy? Is it hard? How do we, and too many of us, I think, look at this concept of easy and hard as an absolute measurement. And the reality is, in my opinion, I think it should be relative to customers' expectation. Because at the end of the day, if you took an easy process and kept it easy, there's no material reward for you. They expect it easy. And if you have a hard process and it remained hard, there's no material penalty to you because they expected it hard. But when there's a mismatch, when they expect easy and you make it hard, that's where the punishments come along. So imagine like in, health insurance, getting a replacement card for your health insurance plan should be a 12-second process. And we make it hard. to get a card. And then they go, why the hell is it so hard? Right? And because they expected something different than they got. So I'm a big believer that we need to first understand and map to expectation and then deliver at or better that, but within cautious ranges, because too much over delivery in some regard is not going to get you bonus points, and too much under delivery in other areas is not going to get you bonus penalty. But you have to understand where those opportunities really are.
Well, if we go back to your original question, Sean, how did we get here? How did organizations ourselves, CXers or Xers, get to where we did, where we are today? I think we've sort of all hit on it. Data. At the end of the day, data was available, right? But for one reason or another, we were actually prevented from accessing that data, or we just overlooked the data. And so I think that is really, if I was to sort of pinpoint the fundamental failure of CX and where and what has happened in the customer experience space over the last few years, I think it's the exact result of that issue of data and not having access to it, or if we did, not using it effectively to tell the customer story. The reason is, when you're at the executive level, data matters. You better be able to tell a story that's backed up by data. And I don't think enough CXers understand data, understand how to put it together, because I think one of the things that we just talked about, we talked about post-transaction, right? Post-transaction data is very good. Emotional data about how the customer feels, where they stand today, in terms of understanding their relationship to the brand is good. But that's only one piece of data. And I think, Susie, you'd mentioned this as well. You have to get the other pieces. There's the overall experience, but below that, there's the interaction piece. So at each point of interaction, how is the relationship being nurtured? And CXers have either been cut out of that conversation or been unable to capture that data, or if they have, it hasn't been used effectively to tell the other side of the story, which is what you need to do better. Because it's at those points of interaction where opportunity lies. And if we can't get to those specific points of interaction, we can't provide the appropriate advice to departments within organizations about what needs to be changed, what needs to be improved. And I think that's the conversation that, sometimes it gets muffled, but that's the conversation that needs to happen in order for CXers to be successful in the future.
Earlier in the conversation, I made a point that there's two competing vectors going on here. One around more holistic, integrative approach where you think about, marketing, product, commerce, and service working together to create a better holistic experience. And the other competing force is the kind of pressure towards data and tech and more real-time analytics, real-time approaches. And they're both valuable and they're competing team forces in an organization. A point that Jason just made, I think, made me think of this and I wanted to build on it, which is data and insights can be used at 3 stages. You can either build upfront insights to help plan and what to do. You can use them for activation to drive real-time, decisioning and optimization, next best blank. Or you can measure things to see what the outcome was and what the results were. And all 3 of those are valuable. But what's happening now is you bring the customer data platform and the journey orchestration, the data and the AI and all these things together, which is a lot of work to put those in at companies. And you get that right. What do you end up with? A compression in time where there's a lot more experimentation, a lot more velocity of things you're doing that are increasingly closer to real time. So the insights, acting, and measurement become like either sprints or instantaneous decisioning, right? So that's the trend we're on right now, is much faster experimentation powered by data. And that's part of why, as an industry, there's all this interest in CX and putting it together with data and analytics and technologies, because there's a lot of opportunity there. Now, companies leave themselves exposed, or teams, if they're the survey people. If all they do is like do surveys and then they're really exposed that they'll be pulled into another group. If you're adding a lot of value and helping foster both of these trends around bringing marketing, product, commerce, and service together and being a change agent, and you're helping lead the charge on how to create value with data and tech and do this more real-time experimentation, then you're a hero and your group is going to get resources. So it's the choice is really yours. What type of change agent do you want to be in the organization, and how do you partner with other people and collaborate to make it happen?
I have a quick question for you, Matt. What happens in the situation where data is just not made available to you in the format that you need to conduct that type of analysis? Because what we're seeing more and more is that with data, for example, using of tools, for example, you only get what you get, or you get what teams are willing to give you. And I would love to say, okay, this has been a CX problem, but I don't think it's a CX problem at its core. I think it's an organizational problem, because the people who are building the tools are making the decision on what data the tool is going to deliver for who. And I think that's where the conversation, CX, has to be able to assert itself into that conversation. And that conversation needs to happen at the beginning of the technology selection, not as an afterthought after the technology has been launched and something has gone wrong. And how CXers can get there, I think it's a very difficult path forward, but it's the path that needs to be taken, because that's where the value is going to be delivered.
100%. And a lot of companies go on these journeys where they spend, I've seen this, $500 million on their ERP, right?
Yeah.
And that's like a $5 billion company, not like a $50 billion company, right? And obviously it varies based on the size of the company. The point is, these are big investments.
Yeah.
Takes up a lot of management bandwidth, a lot of change management effort to make it happen. And a lot of times what the companies do is they take a long road to a small house, the house being the size of the value they create. And to Jason's point, if you don't spend the time up front on that journey around how you creating the right orientation, how you building the right teaming environment, getting the culture right, making sure the data's right, all of these things have to happen up front. Otherwise, you're going to spin your wheels, spend a lot of swirl in the organization. You're going to have a long road to a small house. And then by the time you're done with that journey, you moved on to the next thing. So and the company goes through the swirl all over again. So there's a real opportunity for leadership and collaboration here to put the time in up front to get the data right, to pay attention to culture, to engage your employees, to focus on outcomes. All these things have to happen up front. Otherwise, the journey is not successful.
Yeah, this is great conversation, and I can't agree more. And so I want to kind of take what we've just talked about and kind of tie it in a bow a little bit here. There are probably a lot of people watching this, panel who are out of job. They're CXers that lost their job. Their companies may have taken it and given it to IT, things we talked about. And part of the reason, was they couldn't, Mark, as you opened, they couldn't show the ROI, right, necessarily. But take that a little bit further, this environment is changing. So while these people are looking for work, it's changing under their feet, what's expected of themselves. And so many, unfortunately, we all know this, so many CXers are accidental CXers. They were really good at customer service or something else, so they were asked, hey, why don't you run this team? So they're very limited. So if you really kind of look at what's going on today, I want each one of you to kind of think about that audience of how do you need to change and evolve yourself in coordination with this evolution of the industry, and what can they be doing right now? Because again, I do think that pendulum will swing back. More X people will be rehired because businesses realize they lost an asset. They didn't know the ROI at the time, but when it's gone, they realize it. Sometimes, not everybody. So I think it'll come back, but where does the new CX person need to go? So Mark, let's start with you.
I think that it's really going to come down to the things we've talked about here, that we need to accept CX as a change function and not just a measurement function. And I think we focus in more and more on how can we as professionals make change digestible for other companies and more to the point, other cultures and people. When you think about it, how many times have somebody in a work situation said, I love it when they change my job? Roughly zero. And the reality is people say things like, change is great for them. It's always the them, not the us. And I think that what we need to be able to do is help people accept and embrace the new opportunities and that change brings. And as long as we could position ourselves and what we offer our future opportunities to be more oriented around change and outcome and less about the tactics and tools, I think the more likely we will find success in those roles and the more those roles will be sticky for us in the future. Because that's how you're going to get the results, right? Otherwise, it's just another tool for another sake of another tool. It's like doing AI for the sake of AI. There's no outcome there. And so I think that we need to be outcome oriented.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that, Mark. And Susie, you take us to your thoughts there.
Yeah, appreciate that, Sean. When you asked the question about where should people who are inexperienced focus, at the end of last year, I was exposed to a study that was done by some people in the industry, and they were looking at what are the typical models of CX teams within companies. And there's like the centralized team that does everything for everyone. There's a mixed team in which the centralized team does some of the work, and then each of the business units do their own components. And then there's a more federated model where the organization pretty much puts everything in their own little silos and does it that way. And, going back to my comment about CX as an ingredient, I think people who are focused on experience, it's an opportunity for you to, rather than go back to, I fell into this because I loved marketing and I found a way to affect the brand, or I was passionate about customer service and realized by working up the chain, I could change things. I say go back to your original discipline, whether it's product, marketing, service, whatever it is, and go into that discipline with the idea of knowing that there are very few CX only departments in most companies. That's the smallest amount. And so go find your way back into your chosen field and bring CX as a tool and recreate that value. Show up and say, I know these ways to analyze data. I know these tools that are different than maybe what you're using. I can tell you, if you can get some people who are experience-led into product teams, who are designing apps, who are designing processes, this world would be such a better place. So that would be my recommendation, is don't just look for CX roles anymore, because based on the things that we saw, centralized CX teams are devolving. Find a way to embed yourself back into the place you started and bring your CX toolkit as value add.
Thanks, Susie. I was actually talking to some conference producers that do a dedicated CX conference, and they were saying that this year, it was towards the end of the year, they were struggling to find people with CX in their title anymore. That's where they were focused, because it's just kind of drying up. But yeah, absolutely. Deanna, why don't you add your thoughts here as well?
Yes, absolutely. I think agree with everything that's been said. Two things I would emphasize is understanding a little bit what Susie just said, expanding understanding of the bigger business model. Might be going back to where you started, what your primary focus was, but understanding the interconnectedness of how a business works, or if you're looking at certain companies, back to how are their structures. The more you can understand the business, as we've said, the experience is about that entire journey that's connecting the dots through that company's infrastructure. And the second thing I would say to look at is influence skills, because no matter where you end up, we know customer experience, we've talked about the challenges, the change management, be it influencing the customer versus influencing what you need to do within an organization to get projects approved, mindsets changed, what have you. I think those are the two things I'd focus on, is learning that broader business understanding and business acumen with influence skills.
Absolutely, Deanna, and I would absolutely double down on that one. Anybody doing experience has to be a collaboration leader and an influencer, because it takes everyone across an organization to create the experience. So you have to bridge that gap. Absolutely. Matt.
I think there's a interesting dichotomy here. I agree with something Susie said earlier that think of experience like a mindset and a set of skills rather than a functional role. And it's just like anytime there's a center of excellence, like at one point people had centers of excellence for search, and then it became something all the marketers did, right? You don't have a center of excellence to do something that everyone has to do, right? And I think while customer experience is about bringing marketing, product, commerce, and service together, all of them need experience, not centralizing it. So the role of a central center of excellence will evolve over time, and it won't just be the survey people in the center. It'll be other things that are worked on in the center, and increasingly experiences combined with other things in the center function, like digital and analytics. It's not necessarily a bad thing if the head of analytics leads experience, as long as they're collaborating with others in the organization to drive the right impact. So as an individual who's impacted, you have a choice. Within your company, you can bring your skill set to other functions. Go back, whether it's going back or evolving your career path to continue to build your talent stack. Take your past experience, take your experience that you built in a CX role, and continue to build out your experiences in talent stack. Do you want to learn about change management? Do you want to learn about data and analytics? Do you want to learn about agility? Do you want to learn about experiment design and research? Like, what do you want to learn to build your talent stack to have more impact and apply what you're doing in a way that you can fit within your company? Or alternatively, go work at another company that is making investments in experience and continue to grow your talent stack there. And I think there's lots of opportunities out there. The titles may be different, but the interest and desire to embed experience, human-centered design, agility, and data science are in demand. Change management, all four of those things in your talent stack to be a good CXer, but they may not have a CX title, even if you're working on experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things I tell younger people who really want to, in their career who want to do this, I said, get as much diverse experience as you can. Spend time in marketing, in product and pricing, in finance. I mean, spend as much time in other departments as you can, because that's just going to make you more valuable. So same kind of point here for someone in transition. Jason, what are your thoughts when you think about this lessons learned for the CXer?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a challenge. I think going back to the root of the problem is you're going to need someone that speaks for the customers and advocates for the customer. I think, like almost an ambassador. We talked about this before. I think that knows enough about technology that can have a conversation with IT and push back, and then has the data analytics chops that can dictate, here's how I want the data collected and here's how I want it connected in order to drive the story, and enough business acumen that can bring people together from different departments and get buy-in. That's the future, right? If you don't have those three skill sets, your CX team is going to flounder, and your organization is not going to be as effective as it can be. And I think that's where the future lies. I think because at the head of all this is the customer, and the customer needs to be represented not only at a micro level, but in a macro level as well, when it comes to product innovation, new product design, when it comes to customer service, and everywhere in between.
Yeah, so as we close out today, I'd just like to mention that this is where everybody can learn and grow, whether you're currently employed or looking for work, etc. The transition is real. This evolution is real, and so we all have this opportunity. And one of the best ways to do that is through community, through knowledge and partners and sharing information. So I want to invite everyone to join a brain trust community that we're developing with experts like these, where we'll be meeting monthly and going through some of the biggest changes impacting us. We're calling it CX on the rocks because let's face it, CX is kind of on the rocks right now. We're figuring this out. So if you go to cxontherocks.com, enter your name and your email and get on our mailing list. After the new year, we're going to start this Brain Trust, this community where you'll be able to learn from experts like these and really help each other as well through community change and grow this area of X, not the Twitter replacement, but experience in all the different facets together in community. So thank you so much for attending today and listening in. We appreciate your participation and look forward to talking to you soon.